It's funny how life can hit you with something you never saw coming. One minute, you're living in a happy marriage, thinking you've built something solid, and the next, your entire world unravels before your eyes. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But once I saw those letters, everything changed. I had been married to Emma for almost 7 years. We met in college, fell in love fast, and when we moved in together after graduation, it felt like we were finally settling into the life we'd always dreamed of. We had the house, the dog, and I thought we had a future, a family. She was everything I wanted, beautiful, intelligent, full of energy. We had our arguments, sure, but who doesn't? It was a normal marriage. At least, that's what I thought. It started with something small. A letter. It was buried deep in the back of a drawer I hadn't opened in months. I was looking for an old receipt when I came across it. The paper was old, yellowing at the edges. It was addressed to Emma, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe one of her friends had sent her something by accident, or perhaps she had a correspondence with someone from work that I didn't know about. But when I opened it, everything changed. The letter was signed J. It was full of longing, full of details about a life I didn't know existed. The way he talked about her, the things he knew about her, things she never mentioned to me. It was like reading about someone completely different, someone who wasn't the woman I thought I knew. The letter didn't say everything, but it made enough clear. Emma had been seeing someone. Not just any guy, a man who knew things about her life, things that weren't supposed to be shared with anyone else. The letter spoke about their time together, their plans, and their future. But the most shocking part was at the end, where he mentioned a visit to their house in another city. I froze. A house? What was this man talking about? I read the letter again. And again. The words seemed to blur together the more I tried to understand them. It didn't make sense. A house? A second life? I couldn't just let it go. I had to know more. The next few days were a blur. I pretended everything was fine at home, while my mind raced. I kept replaying the letter over and over, dissecting each word. But nothing prepared me for what I found next. I didn't confront Emma right away. I wanted to be sure. I needed to understand what was happening before I made a fool of myself. So I searched her things. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I had to. I found more letters. Dozens of them. And each one painted a clearer picture of the life she'd been hiding. She wasn't just cheating. She had a whole other life, one I didn't even know existed. A life with someone else. A life in another city. A life I wasn't part of. But the real shock came when I found something more concrete, something that made my blood run cold. It was a picture. A family picture. Emma, a man I didn't recognize, and a little boy, about 3 or 4 years old. They were standing in front of a house, holding hands, smiling like they were a happy family. I couldn't breathe. I stared at that picture for what felt like an eternity. I had to know who this man was. And I needed to understand why she had kept this from me for so long. The more I pieced together, the worse it became. Emma had been living a parallel life, a life I had never suspected. She had another man, another family, and the child, my God, the child, it was his. I could feel the rage building inside me. I wanted to destroy her. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was too cold. Too calculating. I wanted her to think everything was fine. I wanted her to feel safe, to think that her lies were still hidden. I didn't know how to act yet. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let this slide. So I kept my distance, stayed calm. But the anger was eating me alive from the inside. And I hadn't even begun to make her pay. It's strange, you know, the way time works when you're caught in the middle of something like this. One moment, everything's perfectly fine, and then in an instant, you're living in a nightmare you can't escape. I thought I could just sit back, bide my time, maybe get some answers on my own. But no. Emma was too smart for that. She knew me too well. I couldn't let her suspect anything, but I couldn't pretend that nothing had changed. Every little thing she did, every word she said, sent me spiraling. How could I look at her and not see the lie? How could she lie to me like this? To us? The next few days felt like they stretched on forever. I kept my distance, watched her every move, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw her for who she really was. Not the loving wife, not the woman I thought I could trust with everything. No. She was a stranger. A woman with secrets. A woman who had destroyed everything we had built. It was the small things at first that tipped me off. A strange phone call in the middle of the night, a few too many work trips she'd conveniently gone on in the last few months. I hadn't noticed them before. But now, looking back, it was obvious. She had been slipping away from me for a long time. It took a week for me to confront her. A week of me pretending everything was fine, pretending I didn't know the truth. I'm not proud of it. But I had to. I wanted her to think she could keep lying. I needed her to dig herself deeper before I pulled her out of the hole. And then, one night, I was sitting in the living room while she was upstairs getting ready for bed. She had no idea I was about to burn her world down. I stood up and walked quietly to the dresser. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, but my hand reached for one of the drawers where I had found the last batch of letters. I pulled it open, and there it was, a fresh envelope. Her handwriting. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I slid it open. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. I read it, and I could almost hear the voice of that man, Jay, in my head as I saw the words. I miss you so much, baby. I can't wait for our next weekend together. The house is perfect for us. I've been telling everyone about our plans, about our future. I felt a wave of nausea rise in me. Our future? She was planning a future with him. With him, and not with me. She had a house. A life. A child. And I was just some fool sitting here, oblivious to the world she was living in behind my back. I crumpled the letter in my fist. It wasn't enough. I had to confront her. Right then. No more waiting. I walked up the stairs slowly, my anger a knot in my chest. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching her get dressed, her back to me. She hadn't even noticed I was there. Emma, I said, my voice calm, too calm. She froze, then turned. The look on her face, that mix of surprise and guilt, was everything I needed to see. It was the look of someone who thought they could keep up their lie for just a little longer. Hey, what's wrong? She tried to act casual, like she wasn't standing on the edge of a cliff, like I didn't already know everything. I took a step forward. Who is Jay? Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw the fear in them. But only for a second. The mask quickly came back on. Jay? What are you talking about? She forced a laugh, but it didn't fool me. Not anymore. I pulled the letter from my pocket and tossed it on the bed. She looked at it for a moment, then back at me, trying to hide the panic creeping in. But I could see it. She knew. You're not even going to deny it? I asked, my voice colder than ice. You thought you could just live this double life, didn't you? You thought I'd never find out. What is it, Emma? What's going on? Who is he? She stepped back, her breath quickening. I can explain. She started, but I wasn't listening anymore. The words were just noise. I don't want your explanations. I just want the truth. She hesitated. I could tell she was calculating, trying to figure out what the hell she was going to say next. But I wasn't giving her that time. Not anymore. Who's the kid in the picture? I asked, the question cutting through the air like a knife. That one hit her hard. I could see her face pale. Her shoulders slumped as she finally spoke, her voice trembling. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her eyes flickering with guilt. But the lies weren't going to work. Not now. You didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, the anger boiling inside me. How long, Emma? How long have you been doing this? How long have you been living with him? With them? She sank down onto the bed, her face in her hands. It's not. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant to fall in love with him. But it just happened. She said it like it was some innocent mistake. Like falling in love with another man while married was just some unfortunate accident. You think this is an accident? I asked, my voice rising now. You've been living with him, Emma. You've been raising a child with him. And you think this is just some accident? I didn't want to lose you. I didn't know how to tell you, she cried, looking up at me, tears streaming down her face. But the damage was done. The woman I loved, the woman I had trusted, was gone. I didn't know her anymore. She was just a stranger who had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to fathom. I want you gone by tomorrow, I said, my voice as cold as the floor beneath my feet. Her eyes widened. What? You can't. I'm not asking, I snapped. Tomorrow. Pack your things and leave. I turned and walked out of the room, my mind already working, already planning the revenge that was coming. I wasn't going to let her off easy. I wasn't going to let her think she could just walk away from this with no consequences. She'd made her choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. The house felt different. Empty. Silent, except for the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hallway. I hadn't been this quiet in years. It wasn't just that Emma had betrayed me. It was everything. The trust, the love, the life we'd built together. It had all been a lie. And I was done. The night she left, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every part of me burned with anger and disgust, but there was something else too, something colder. A strange calm had taken over. She was gone. She was out of my life. But that didn't mean the story was over. Far from it. By morning, Emma was packing her things. She didn't try to fight it, didn't try to change my mind. I think deep down, she knew it was too late. She had pushed me too far. As I watched her stuff her clothes into bags, I couldn't help but feel a sick satisfaction. This was her consequence. She was losing everything. I didn't say much to her. There was no need. I didn't need to yell or scream or try to make her feel guilty. She knew. I knew. We both knew what had happened. The words would only cheapen the reality of it. She was nearly done when she turned to face me, her eyes red from crying. I never meant for it to end like this, she said softly, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at her, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I don't care, I said, my voice dead. I don't care what you wanted. You made your choice. She looked like she wanted to say more, to explain herself, but I wasn't interested. The only thing I cared about now was getting the last word. Getting my revenge. You're not the woman I married, I said coldly. You're a stranger to me now. She opened her mouth like she was going to protest, but then she just nodded. She knew there was nothing left to salvage. I could see the defeat in her eyes. It was over. When she was gone, I stood in the empty house for what felt like hours. The silence was suffocating. But it wasn't just the silence of a broken marriage. It was the silence of a man who had just realized how completely and utterly betrayed he had been. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the need to. What good would it do? Instead, I began to plan. I was done with her, but I wasn't done with them. There was still the other man, the one she had been hiding for years. The one who had taken my wife, my life, and turned it into his own twisted little dream. And I was going to make sure he paid for it. I spent the next few days tracking down everything I could find about him. The more I dug, the more I realized that this man, Jay, wasn't some random fling. He was someone Emma had been seriously involved with for years. They'd built a life together, a life that didn't include me. It wasn't just the house, the child, and the weekends. No, this was a full-blown affair. They had plans. Plans for a future that didn't have me in it. I found his name, his job, his social media profiles. I even found his address. He lived just a few hours away, in a small town where they had bought a house together. The same house in the pictures. A place where my wife had been spending time with him, pretending like she was a different person. It made my stomach churn to think about it. I couldn't leave it at that. I wasn't going to let them live their happy little life while I sat here broken. It was time to pay them a visit. I drove to that town on a Friday afternoon. The whole way there, I could feel the weight of the anger in my chest. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my jaw tight. I kept thinking about Emma's face, the way she'd looked when I told her to leave. The way she'd finally realized that I was done with her lies, done with her betrayal. I wanted to destroy that life she had built with him. I wanted her to feel the exact same way I had felt. When I pulled up to the house, I parked across the street. The house was nice, in a quiet neighborhood, just like the ones Emma had always wanted. It was perfect. A perfect little family home. But I wasn't here to admire it. I was here to tear it all down. I sat there for a long time, watching, waiting. I wanted to make sure they were both home. I wasn't going to do anything without being absolutely sure. Eventually, a car pulled into the driveway. It was him. I saw him get out and walk into the house. My heart started pounding. This was it. I waited a few more minutes, then got out of the car. I walked toward the house slowly, each step purposeful. I was calm. Too calm. There was no room for hesitation now. This wasn't about fighting or confronting him. It was about sending a message. I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house. A few seconds later, the door opened. It was him. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking at me with confusion. I looked at him for a moment, feeling the anger boiling inside me, but I kept my face neutral. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "You can help me by explaining why you've been sleeping with my wife." His eyes widened. He took a step back, clearly trying to process what I had just said. But I didn't give him time to think. "I know everything," I continued, my tone sharp. "I know about you, about her, about the life you've built together. And I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences of it." His face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I stepped inside, pushing the door open. He didn't stop me. "Where's Emma?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He swallowed, then motioned toward the stairs. "She's upstairs," he muttered, his voice weak. I didn't waste any time. I walked past him, heading toward the stairs. It was time to end this. The house smelled like them. It wasn't a scent I could describe, just something about the air that felt too familiar. Too comfortable. It was everything Emma and I never had, and now I was standing in the middle of it. The house she had built with him. I took the stairs slowly, every step deliberate, my mind focused. I wasn't here to negotiate. I wasn't here to cry or beg for explanations. This wasn't about me. This was about the betrayal. About making them both understand the depth of what they had done to me, to us. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard voices. Low. Almost muffled. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I could already feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I walked toward the room where I knew Emma would be, my heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. I knocked once, twice. No answer. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking. I saw her, Emma, sitting on the bed, her back to me. She was talking to someone on the phone. At first I thought it was Jay. But no. When she turned around, the phone slipped from her hands, her eyes wide with shock. J.I. She cut herself off when she saw me standing there, the door wide open behind me. Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. But the panic in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't expecting this. Not like this. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," I said, my voice calm, cold. "It's time we talk about your little secret life, Emma." She scrambled to stand, her hands trembling. "Please, you shouldn't be here." "No," I interrupted. "We don't need to talk." You don't get to explain this away. Not after everything you've done. I stepped closer, not giving her a chance to move, to hide. I know everything. I know about the house, about your little family. About him. And about the kid, Emma. Her eyes flickered with guilt, but she tried to hide it, to play it off as if it didn't matter. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. It just happened. We didn't plan this. Stop! I snapped. I'm not interested in your excuses. You've been living a lie. You've been lying to me, to yourself, to everyone around you. And now I'm here to make sure you understand the consequences. She opened her mouth again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I stared at her for a long moment, the anger still simmering inside me, but there was something colder now, something darker. The pain was gone. It had been replaced with a need for justice, for balance. And she wasn't going to get away with this. You don't get to say you're sorry, Emma, I said, my voice ice. Not after everything. Not after he took my place. Not after you took everything we had and threw it away. She flinched at the mention of he. She had been seeing him for years, yes, but there was more to it, much more. She wasn't just in love with him. They were planning a life together. A life I wasn't even a part of. I had been nothing more than a placeholder, a convenient husband. You think you can just come in here, act like nothing's wrong, and everything will be okay? Well, it won't. Not anymore, I continued. I'm not going to let you get away with this. Emma tried to approach me, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. I wasn't going to let her touch me. Not after everything. Where is he? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. Where's Jay? She hesitated. He's downstairs, she whispered, her voice breaking. I could hear the fear in her tone, but it wasn't enough. She didn't deserve my sympathy. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, heading back down the stairs. I didn't need to look at her anymore. I was done. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Jay was there, standing in the living room, looking uncomfortable. He must have heard me coming. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face a mixture of confusion and wariness. So you're the guy, I said, my voice steady, cold. The one who's been sleeping with my wife. The one who thinks he can just take what's mine without any consequences. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. I know everything, I said. I know about the house, the kid, the weekends you've spent with her behind my back. I know you've been living in my world, pretending like it's yours. He took a step back, his hands slightly raised, like he was trying to defuse a bomb. Listen, man, this isn't what you think. No, I cut him off. Don't even try to talk your way out of this. You don't get to play the victim here. You're just as guilty as she is. He swallowed hard. I never meant for it to get this far, he said, his voice shaky. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just love her. I laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. You love her? Is that what you call it? You think you're the good guy here? You think she's the woman you're going to grow old with? Well, think again. You're nothing but a liar, just like her. I could see him shaking now, his confidence slipping. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for someone like me, someone who had lost everything. You think you're going to keep living here, pretending you didn't destroy my life? I asked, my voice low, menacing. No. This ends today. I turned toward the door, the final blow already on my mind. I wasn't here to kill him or make a scene. No, I had something worse in mind. I was going to ruin them. I was going to make sure they could never be happy again. I turned back to him one last time before I walked out. Enjoy your house, your family. It won't last long. And with that I left. But as I walked out the door, I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. There was more to do. More that needed to be undone. I left that house feeling nothing. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Nothing. Just an overwhelming emptiness, like a hole had opened up inside me that nothing would ever fill. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. But something in me had changed. The man I was before? Gone. As I drove back home, I couldn't help but think about how easy it had been to tear down the life they built. It had been too easy. Maybe I'd underestimated the effect this would have on me, on my soul. Emma and her little family, the perfect picture they had painted for themselves, was already crumbling. But I wasn't finished yet. I had one last thing to do. When I got home, I spent the next few hours in front of my computer, the glow of the screen lighting up my face. I wasn't just going to leave them in the dark. They needed to understand exactly who I was, what I was capable of, and what their little secret life was going to cost them. I had the address. I had his name. I even had the information about their kid, the child who wasn't mine, but who I was supposed to have cared about like he was. But there was something more satisfying than just knowing everything. I was going to expose them. I wasn't going to leave them a single place to hide. I went to social media first. I knew the name of his company, his job, everything he'd used to hide behind a normal life. It wasn't hard to dig through public records, legal documents, photos of him and Emma. I had it all. And now, I was going to give them a front row seat to their destruction. The first post was easy. I went straight to his workplace's public page, created a fake profile, and sent them an anonymous message. It was simple. I attached photos, pictures of Emma and him, from the house they had shared, laughing together, holding hands. Proof of their affair. This is your employee's private life. Wonder how that will go over in the office? I left it at that, watching the message be delivered. I didn't care how he reacted. The damage was already done. I could feel the satisfaction creeping in, but I knew this was just the beginning. Next, I went to Emma's social media, where she posted cute family pictures with our dog, our house, the places we used to visit together. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand seeing her pretend like we were still that happy couple, even when I knew what she was doing behind my back. I posted one last thing, this time from a fake profile. A picture of her with him. The two of them, standing together in front of the house I had paid for, in the life I had built for us. The message? It was simple. Guess what? This is your wife. This is your family. And it's all a lie. I didn't just leave it at that. I tagged people. People I knew would see it. People she knew, people he knew, and more importantly, people from her workplace, from their circle. Let them all see. Let them all know. Let her life burn. I didn't expect her to react so quickly. But by the time I'd gone to bed, my phone was blowing up. Messages. Calls. Notifications. Everyone was talking. Emma was scrambling, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. I could feel her panic through the screen, but it didn't matter. Nothing would make this better. She tried to call me. I ignored it. Then I saw it. A message from her workplace. A colleague. What's going on? We just saw those pictures. My phone buzzed again. It was Jay. His name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. I smiled as I turned my phone off. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. By the time I woke up the next morning, everything had already started to unravel. News spread quickly. Emma's friends, her colleagues, even her family started reaching out to her. I could almost hear her pleading for help. She was panicking, calling people she hadn't spoken to in months, trying to piece together the wreckage of her perfect little life. I didn't care. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. And then there was him. Jay. The man who had taken everything from me. The one who thought he could step into my shoes, take my wife, take my life, without consequence. I wasn't done with him either. A few hours later, I found out that Jay had been fired. He had been removed from his job after the company's HR team had gotten involved. His reputation was in tatters. No one wanted to be associated with him, not after what I had exposed. Emma called me again that evening. This time I answered. Please, just listen to me, she begged. Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. I never wanted any of this to happen. I love you. I always loved you. You don't get to say that, I replied, my voice low, deliberate. Not after everything. Not after you destroyed everything we had. Please, she continued, desperation creeping in. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I made a mistake. I made a huge mistake. I leaned back in my chair, hearing her sob on the other end of the line. But there was nothing left for me to feel. Nothing left for her to say that would make this better. You're right, I said, my voice suddenly cold, final. You did make a mistake. But it's too late now. You've already ruined everything. You've already ruined me. She stayed silent for a long time. I could hear her breathing heavily, trying to compose herself. Trying to find a way to make this all go away. Goodbye, Emma, I said, hanging up the phone before she could respond. The days that followed were chaos for her, for him, for everyone involved. They tried to piece their lives back together, but it was futile. Emma's family found out. Her friends found out. He was alienated, fired from his job, and publicly shamed. His reputation was gone. And Emma? She was left with nothing but a shattered image of herself. As for me? I didn't need to watch the fallout. I didn't need to see the tears. I didn't need any more closure. I had already exacted my revenge. But the truth was that Emma had always been gone. She just hadn't told me yet. It's funny, isn't it? How everything can seem so final when you're standing on the edge of it. But then, when you think it's over, when you think the dust has settled, life has a way of throwing one last curveball. That's exactly what happened. I'd expected them to lie low for a while. For Emma to retreat into her shame, for Jay to lick his wounds. The storm I'd unleashed had turned their world upside down, and I thought that was the end of it. I was done. I'd walked away. They were in their hell. But I didn't account for the desperation. It was 2 weeks after the social media debacle when Emma reached out again. At first, I didn't recognize the number. My phone buzzed with a text, simple, direct. We need to talk. I didn't respond. But then, the next day, another message. Please, I'm begging you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need to see you. I should have ignored it. I knew that. I'd already gotten my revenge. Emma had been broken, humiliated. She had nothing left to offer. There was no reason to open that door again. But I couldn't help it. Something about her plea, something in the way it sounded, gnawed at me. Was she playing me? Or was she genuinely in pain? So I agreed to meet her. We met at a coffee shop. She showed up looking different. Not the woman I had known, the confident, self-assured wife, but someone small, fragile, and tired. Her eyes were red, her hair unkempt. She looked like a woman who had been stripped of everything she'd built, left with nothing but a pile of regret. She barely said a word when she sat down. The silence between us was suffocating, and for a moment, I thought maybe we could just pretend this whole thing never happened. But we both knew it had. After a while, she broke the silence. Are you proud of yourself? She asked, her voice low but steady. What you've done to me? To him? To everyone? I stared at her, letting the question hang in the air. Was I proud? I wasn't sure. I'd hurt her. I'd hurt him. I'd hurt myself. But none of that mattered. None of it had ever mattered. I did what I had to do, I said flatly, leaning back in my chair. You don't get to do what you did and walk away without consequences. I'm not sorry for what happened. She flinched at my words, but I saw the tears start to well up in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, trying to keep control. You don't understand, she whispered. I didn't want any of this. I didn't want him. I never planned to hurt you. Then why did you do it? I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Because I was scared. Because you were always gone. Always working, always distant. And he was there. He made me feel seen. He made me feel alive again. I laughed bitterly. So you're telling me you were lonely, so you just decided to destroy everything we built? She stared down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, she said again, this time more quietly. I'm sorry for everything. I couldn't bring myself to feel pity for her. Not anymore. Maybe once, before I knew everything, I would have wanted to help her, to fix it. But now, it was too late for apologies. Too late for any of that. I've already destroyed you, Emma, I said, my voice cold. What's left to fix? Her hands shook as she clasped them together, trying to hold it all in. But she couldn't. She couldn't keep the tears back anymore. She started crying, sobbing quietly into her hands, the weight of everything crashing down on her. For the first time since everything had blown up, I saw her as she truly was, weak, vulnerable, and utterly broken. I didn't feel any satisfaction in her tears. I didn't feel any relief. I just felt nothing. For a while, we sat there in silence, the air thick with the tension of what was left unsaid. Eventually, she wiped her eyes and looked at me again. I've lost everything, she said, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't have him. I don't have you. I don't have anything. I should have told her that it was her own fault. That she had dug her own grave and now she had to lie in it. But something in the way she looked at me, so lost, so broken, kept me from saying it. You've lost more than just them, I said instead. You've lost yourself, Emma. She didn't say anything after that. She stood up, left a few bills on the table, and walked out of the cafe. I watched her go, my heart heavy with something I couldn't quite name. I didn't want to feel sympathy for her. But I did. It was ridiculous. She'd done this to herself. She had destroyed everything. And yet, seeing her like this, seeing her fall apart in front of me, left me feeling empty. I wanted her to be gone from my life forever. But I couldn't deny that some part of me still cared. Or maybe that part of me had never really gone away. But I wasn't the one who had broken this. She had. I was the one left picking up the pieces. The next few days passed without incident. Emma didn't reach out again. Neither did Jay. They both retreated into their own darkness, trying to salvage whatever scraps of their former lives they could. But I didn't care anymore. They weren't my problem. But then came the phone call. It was from Emma's mother. Her voice was frantic, panicked. I don't know what happened, but Emma's in the hospital. She tried to kill herself. My heart stopped. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Was it guilt? Relief? Shock? I didn't know. I rushed to the hospital. By the time I arrived, Emma was unconscious, hooked up to IVs and machines. Her mother was pacing in the waiting room, her face pale with worry. She couldn't handle it anymore, her mother said, her voice trembling. The shame, the lies, it was too much for her. I stood there, watching her mother cry, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should be there at all. But then I heard it. The soft beep of the heart monitor. Steady. Quiet. Emma wasn't dead. She wasn't gone. And for some reason, that made me feel even worse. When I left the hospital that night, Emma was still unconscious. The doctors said she'd be okay, that the overdose wasn't enough to end her life, but the psychological damage was undeniable. I don't know why, but I stayed longer than I meant to. Maybe I felt responsible, maybe guilt had crept in. It wasn't just her life that had shattered. It was mine too. And no matter how much I tried to distance myself from it all, the truth was still there, lurking under the surface. Emma woke up 2 days later. I wasn't there. Her mother, of course, had been by her side. But I couldn't be. I didn't know what to feel. I had watched her break herself apart. I had destroyed her. And now she was begging for my forgiveness. But the thing was, I didn't want to forgive her. Her mother called me again that evening. She wants to see you, she said, her voice wavering. She's asking for you. I sat in silence for a long time. My fingers gripped the phone, but I didn't know how to respond. What could I say? What was left to say? You don't have to go, her mother continued. But I think she needs you. I hung up without saying anything. The next morning, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to go. Maybe it was because she'd been in the hospital, or maybe it was the guilt creeping back in. But I drove to the hospital. I walked down the hallway toward her room, but before I reached the door, I heard her voice. Please don't let him in, she said, her voice hoarse, barely audible. It was her mother, trying to comfort her, but I could hear the pain in Emma's words. She didn't want to see me. And yet, somehow, I knew I had to be there. I needed to look her in the eye, to make sure that this time, she truly understood the cost of her actions. I knocked softly on the door before entering. Emma was lying in the bed, pale and fragile, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw me, her face tightened. She didn't say a word, but I could see it in her eyes, the defeat, the shame, the fear. How are you feeling? I asked, my voice cold, detached. How do you think I feel? She whispered, her voice breaking. You destroyed me. I didn't argue with her. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. I didn't want to hurt you, she continued, her eyes pleading. I never wanted to hurt anyone. It just happened. Please, please don't hate me. I stared at her for a long time, trying to process it. Trying to figure out how I should feel. Should I pity her? Should I let the anger I had bottled up all these months finally come out? Do you love him? I asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. She looked away, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I don't know. I thought I did. But now I just feel empty. I feel like I lost everything, everyone. I nodded. You did lose everything, Emma. But not because of him. Because of you. She winced as if my words physically hurt her. You think I don't know that? She whispered. You think I haven't been kicking myself every day for the choices I made? For the lies I told? For everything? I didn't respond. I wasn't here to comfort her. I wasn't here to make her feel better. I was here because I needed to make sure I had the closure I'd been desperately searching for. I'll be leaving soon, I said finally. I won't come back. You won't see me again after this. She nodded, her head drooping. Please don't hate me, she said one last time, but I didn't answer. I turned and left the room, feeling a strange emptiness that I couldn't shake. The days after that were quiet. Emma recovered, but the damage was already done. Her life was in shambles. She was practically cut off from everyone she had known before. Her friends, her family, even her colleagues, everyone turned their backs on her. Even Jay couldn't stay around to pick up the pieces. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had disappeared. No one knew where he went. Rumors swirled, some said he had left town. Others said he'd gone into hiding. It didn't matter. The truth was, he'd gotten what he deserved. His life, just like Emma's, had been ruined. As for me, I moved on. It wasn't that I'd forgotten everything. I could never forget. But I was done. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I found new purpose. New things to focus on. I started traveling again, working on projects I had put off for years. I didn't have to worry about Emma anymore. She wasn't my problem. But then, one evening, nearly 3 months later, I got a letter. It was addressed to me in a handwriting I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. But when I opened it and started reading, the blood drained from my face. It wasn't from Emma. It was from her mother. I read through the letter, my eyes scanning the words over and over, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Emma had done something. She had disappeared. She left me nothing but a note. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't face this life anymore. I can't face what I've done. I can't face you. I love you, but it's too much. I'm leaving. For good. And that was it. No explanation. No final goodbyes. No contact details. I don't know why I still cared. After everything, after all the damage she had caused, I shouldn't have. But that letter, it gnawed at me. Had she really left for good? Or had I just pushed her into another spiral of self-destruction? I tried calling her mother, but she didn't pick up. I tried reaching out to mutual friends, but no one had heard from her. No one knew where she was. Then, weeks later, I received a final letter. This one, though, was even more chilling. It wasn't from Emma. It was from someone else. Someone unexpected. I won't reveal who it was just yet. But the person who wrote that letter wasn't Emma. And it would change everything. I wasn't prepared for it. No matter how much I braced myself, the letter I received shook me to my core. At first, I thought it was another desperate plea from Emma. But the handwriting wasn't hers. It wasn't even her mother's. This time, it was from someone I had never expected to hear from again. The letter began with 2 words that froze me in place. "I'm sorry." I had to read it twice, 3 times even, to make sense of it. It was from Jay, the man Emma had cheated on me with. I'm sure you can imagine the gut punch that came with that realization. After everything that had happened, after the destruction he'd caused in my life, here he was, writing me a letter. The letter wasn't long, but it carried a weight that I wasn't ready to carry. He explained everything. "I don't know where to start. I'm not proud of what happened, but I need to tell you the truth. Emma, she didn't leave because of you. She didn't leave because of us. She left because of something that happened before we even met." I had to put the letter down. I couldn't read any more. But my mind was already spinning, trying to piece together what I had just read. What could he possibly mean by that? I forced myself to pick up the letter again. "I never intended for any of this to happen. Emma and I, we had something. It wasn't love, not the way she wanted it to be. But I know now that I hurt her too, and I'll live with that forever. But there's more. When she left, she went back to where it all started. Back to a place I should have never let her go." The letter ended with one final shocking sentence. "I'm sorry, but I think you need to know the truth. Emma has a child. A child from someone else. And that's why she had to leave. She's been hiding it from everyone. From you. From me." I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. What the hell was going on? A child? Emma had a child with someone else? The truth was unraveling faster than I could keep up with, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to know more or if I wished I could just burn it all away. But it didn't stop there. I spent the next few days trying to process everything. The more I thought about the letter, the more it started to make sense. Emma had always been secretive, but a child? How had I missed this? Had I been that blind, that disconnected? I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think of was to find out the truth. If Emma was hiding something that big, then I deserved to know. And I was determined to find her, no matter the cost. It didn't take long to track her down. It was like she'd been waiting for me to show up. I found her in a small town, several hours away, tucked into a quiet neighborhood that I never would have thought to look in. Her mother had told me Emma was gone for good, that she couldn't handle the fallout of everything. But the truth was, she'd been living in a house here for weeks. She was hiding from me, from her past, and from the consequences of her choices. When I arrived at her house, my heart was pounding in my chest. I had no idea what to expect, no idea if I'd find her with a family, or if I'd find nothing at all. I knocked on the door. A moment passed, then another. And then, I heard the faint sound of footsteps from inside. When the door opened, I couldn't believe what I saw. There she was. Emma. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a small boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old. His hair was a little messy, his eyes bright and innocent. And in that moment, I understood everything. This was her child. This was the one she had been hiding from me, from everyone. The boy's gaze drifted to me, and he smiled. I didn't know how to react. My mind was spinning. Emma's face, when she saw me, fell. For a moment she froze, her eyes widening with surprise. But then, just as quickly, she composed herself. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my words colder than I meant them to be. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever say anything about him?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped back, moving to the side, away from the boy. "You don't need to be here," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. You can't understand." But I had to understand. I had to know why she had been living this double life, why she had kept this secret, this child, from me for so long. I pushed past her, my anger rising. "You kept a child from me. For how long? Why? Was this all just a game to you?" Emma flinched, but then her eyes hardened. "I didn't keep him from you. I kept him from the world. From everyone. Because I knew if you found out, everything would fall apart. You wouldn't understand. You couldn't." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "So this whole time, all this time, you were lying to me. You weren't the woman I thought you were. You weren't even the woman you thought you were." Just as the words left my mouth, I heard a voice behind me. "You're wrong. She's not lying." I turned around. Standing in the doorway was Jay, the man who had once destroyed my life. I had no idea what to feel. Seeing him here in her house, with her child, was a punch to the gut. But his words cut deeper. "You don't get it," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about you and Emma. It's about her. She was always trying to escape something, trying to fix a mistake she made years ago. I didn't need to hear any more. I was done. But I had one last question. Who is the father?" I asked, my voice quieter now, calmer, but just as lethal. Emma turned her head, her lips trembling. And then, almost too quietly to hear, she spoke. "His name is Luke. And he's gone now. He's dead." Everything stopped when Emma said his name. "Look." The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of a secret that had been buried for years. Her words hit me like a slap, but somehow, I couldn't bring myself to ask her more. What was there left to ask? Luke was dead. Dead, but still, his shadow loomed over everything, over Emma, over me, over this child I now realized had always been here, under my nose, hidden away. "Luke is dead." Her voice wavered, almost like she was afraid to say it out loud, afraid to admit that the past she had so carefully buried could come flooding back. "I didn't want to tell you," Emma whispered. "I didn't want you to know that he was the one who gave me the child." The boy, standing silently by her side, looked up at me with innocent eyes, oblivious to the weight of the conversation. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? All I could think about was the betrayal, the magnitude of it. I thought back to the years we spent together, to the love I thought we had, to all the moments she had lied to me. And yet, here I was, looking at her, at the child, and at the man I had once considered my enemy. It all felt surreal. "What happened to Luke?" I finally managed to ask. My voice was barely a whisper, though. I didn't really want to hear the answer. But something inside me told me that I needed to know. Emma's expression darkened as she looked away from me, her fingers running nervously over the fabric of her sleeve. For a moment, I thought she might not answer at all. But then she spoke, her voice low and distant. "Luke was different," she began. "He wasn't like anyone I've ever known. He was charming. He could make you feel like you were the only person in the world. I thought I loved him. But I was so wrong. He didn't love me. Not really." I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. I should have known. Of course she had loved him. All this time, I had been so focused on her betrayal with Jay, with the affair, but the real ghost in the picture, Luke, had always been lurking in the background. "And then what happened?" I pushed, unable to stop myself. Emma hesitated before answering, her eyes shifting uneasily between me and the child. He wasn't a good person," she said, her voice almost trembling. "He wasn't who he pretended to be. And after the baby, after I found out I was pregnant, he changed. He became dangerous. The truth was, he was in some deep stuff. Drugs, debt, everything. It was spiraling. Fast. I took a step forward, my gaze locked on her. So you left him. Is that it? You left and started over with me because you wanted a normal life? Emma's face faltered. No, it wasn't like that. She was shaking now, her hands gripping the boy's shoulders tightly, as if trying to shield him from my judgment. I didn't want to keep running. But I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't stay. He wouldn't let me leave. I tried, I really did. But he made it clear that if I left with the baby, if I left him behind, there would be consequences. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest. What kind of consequences? He hurt me, she whispered. He hurt me badly. And then, one day, he was gone. The police said it was an accident. But I don't think it was. I don't think they ever found out the truth. An accident. I looked at her, trying to make sense of the words she was saying. She had never told me this. She had never let me know the extent of what happened with Luke. And now, the pieces were all falling into place. She had been running from her past, running from him, from Luke. She'd kept it all hidden, and in the end, it had destroyed everything. But the more she spoke, the less I believed it was as simple as an accident. There was something off about the way she said it, something that hinted at a deeper, darker secret she still wasn't ready to face. Where is he buried? I asked, almost without thinking. If he's dead, where is he now? Emma's face went pale. She stepped back, her gaze darting nervously. I don't know. I don't want to talk about this anymore. But I was too far gone. The pieces were shifting in my mind, and I could feel it. The truth was out there. And I needed to find it. I have to know, I said, my voice dangerously calm now. Where is he buried, Emma? She hesitated, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. His body was never found, she said, the words barely a whisper. They said it was an accident, that the car crashed and they couldn't find him. But I never believed it. I couldn't. I froze. His body was never found? But if he's dead, I started, my thoughts swirling. Then why didn't the police ever find the body? Why didn't they investigate it further? I don't know, Emma said, almost pleading now. I just wanted to leave it behind. I wanted to protect us. To protect the baby. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. It was all unraveling, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. I wasn't sure what was worse, the lies, the betrayal, or the fact that Emma had been living this life of fear and guilt, trying to hide it from me, from everyone. I thought she was the woman I knew. But it turned out she was nothing like I thought. I turned and walked toward the door, the child's innocent face still haunting me as I left. I had to find out what happened to Luke. I had to know if he was really dead, or if he was something much, much worse. As I stepped outside, the air felt thick, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know where to start, but one thing was clear, the man I thought I knew was still out there, and I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The drive back home was a blur. The night had fallen, and I didn't care about the time. I had to know more. I couldn't let it go, not like this. Emma's words echoed in my mind. Luke's body was never found. The twisted logic of it all, the constant lies, the fact that she never came clean about him. It was all starting to feel like a trap I had walked right into. I didn't even care to stop at home. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face the empty house where everything had been a lie. Instead, I went straight to the one place I could think of, the local police station. The officer at the desk looked at me with the kind of indifference only someone who'd worked there for too long could muster. "Can I help you?" he asked, barely looking up from his paperwork. "I need information about a case," I said, voice flat. "A missing person case from several years ago. A man named Luke Harris." His eyes flicked up then, like he recognized the name, and for a second, I could see the hesitation. It was subtle, but it was there. "That was a long time ago," he said slowly, shifting in his seat. You sure you want to reopen that? It was ruled an accident. I don't care about your ruling, I snapped, leaning over the counter. I want to know the truth. He's not dead, is he? The officer paused, his face hardening. That's not your business, he said coldly. If you're here to stir up old trouble, you need to leave. I didn't move. Tell me where he was last seen, I demanded. The officer sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't have time for this. The case is closed. You need to. But I interrupted him, my voice suddenly quiet and dangerous. I know Emma. I know her better than anyone. She's been hiding this from me for years. But she doesn't have the guts to tell me the full truth. And you know it, don't you? I leaned closer. Tell me what happened to Luke Harris. There was a long pause. Then, just as I was about to walk away, the officer finally spoke. He wasn't dead, he muttered barely above a whisper. We couldn't find him. We still haven't. But we found his car crashed into a ravine. There was blood, but no body. Nothing. No sign of him. I felt my chest tighten. So he just disappeared? The officer shook his head. No. It wasn't an accident. That much is clear. But we couldn't prove anything, and eventually, the case got closed. His girlfriend, Emma, she was questioned. But nothing ever came of it. I could feel the bow rising in my throat. Emma had never been questioned properly. She'd never been held accountable. And I had been too stupid to see it. Too blind. I walked out of the station, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about survival. Emma had kept me in the dark for years, and now it was clear, Luke wasn't some casualty of an affair. He was part of the bigger story. Part of a much darker game. And she was at the center of it. I had to find out more. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do, research. I went through every bit of information I could find on Luke Harris, every scrap, every news article. And finally it hit me, there was one name that kept coming up, one that had eluded me before. A name I didn't recognize but should have, Maxwell Dunn. Maxwell Dunn was a notorious figure in the criminal world, someone who had connections everywhere. And in one of the old articles I found, it mentioned that Luke Harris had crossed paths with him shortly before his disappearance. A drug deal gone wrong, it said. A deal that had been arranged behind closed doors, a deal that had led to Luke's death. But the truth was even darker than I could have imagined. Maxwell Dunn was alive. And he was connected to Emma. The realization hit me like a punch in the stomach. I rushed to Emma's house, my thoughts a storm of fury and confusion. I had no idea what I would find, but I knew I had to confront her about everything, once and for all. When I arrived at her doorstep, she was waiting for me. The boy wasn't there anymore. She was alone, standing at the door, her face pale, her eyes wary. She knew I was close to the truth, and she was afraid. I didn't even greet her. I just stepped inside, my gaze locked on hers. I know everything, I said flatly. I know about Maxwell Dunn. I know about Luke. Her breath hitched. You shouldn't be here. You kept him from me. I spat. You hid everything. You thought you could get away with it. But I know now. I know you never loved me. I was just your cover, wasn't I? Just a way to keep the world from knowing who you really are. Her eyes welled up, but I couldn't feel pity. Not anymore. Not after everything. Please, you don't understand, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't want it to happen this way. You didn't want it? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Then why the hell didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you tell me about Luke? About the deal gone wrong? About Maxwell? She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything. But I did love you. I swear I did. It wasn't just about the money or the things Maxwell offered me. I stepped forward, my voice low, like the threat of an oncoming storm. You didn't just lie to me, Emma. You lied to everyone. To that child. You've been running from your past your whole life, and now it's all coming back to haunt you. Her voice broke as she took a step back. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell you about Maxwell. He had control over me. The doors slammed open behind me. And there he was. Maxwell Dunn? He stood there, his cold smile spreading across his face as he looked at me, then at Emma. His eyes were like ice, calculating, predatory. Well, he said, his voice smooth. Looks like the truth's finally come out, huh? In that moment, everything clicked. Maxwell Dunn was the true puppet master behind all of this. The affair. The child. The lies. Emma had been just one piece in his world of manipulation and control. I wasn't dealing with a woman who'd simply cheated on me. I was dealing with a woman who had been ensnared in a dangerous web, and I was the last fool to realize it. I looked at Emma one last time, my face expressionless. She was trembling now, her hands shaking at her sides. And for the first time in years, I felt nothing. I walked out of that house and never looked back.